Please welcome to the stage Dr. Mark Somerville.
I want to talk to you today about the implicit mental models that I think we all hold about the relationship between education and value creation. I'll start with two stories that I think are helpful for illustrating the idea. Now, my first story, it's a personal story. It's from about 10 years ago. I was a faculty member in sabbatical in Europe, right? Nice place to be. I was working with a new engineering program there that was developing their undergraduate curriculum. And as I was working with that program to basically renovate their curriculum, I thought it was important, as an American, to understand the context a little bit, to understand the culture. And so one of the first things I did was I went and interviewed the faculty there about the old program. I went to faculty and I said, tell me what the really important educational experiences are that students have while they're here at university. Well, the faculty members would think about that for a bit, and then they would start to talk about courses. Usually it was their courses. I went to students next, and I said the same thing. Tell me about the most important educational experience you've had during your time here at the university. Well, students would think about that too. And then, usually, their eyes would light up. I remember one student who told me passionately about the 2 years that he had spent running the bar at his soccer club, and how difficult and how frustrating and how ultimately rewarding it was to be responsible for a €150,000 budget, which is a lot of beer. Another student talked eagerly about the research that she was doing with a faculty member, developing new materials for aerospace applications. And I've got to tell you, of the dozen or so students that I interviewed, not one mentioned a course. Well, as a faculty member, I have one thing to say about that. Ouch. My second story is from the beginning of Olin College. When we started at Olin College, we invited students to join us as partners to help us to build the college, which means that first set of students, during their entire time at Olin, were helping to invent, to test, and to reinvent every aspect of the Olin education, which means like every class they took was version 0. When it came to graduation time, the students made t-shirts. The front of the t-shirts read, Olin Class of 2006, worst Olin education ever. Which was true. Every class they took was nothing but, it was not smooth. Every class they took was going to be better for that next set of students who were going to come. But the back of the t-shirts read Olin Class of 2006, best Olin education ever. And I've got to tell you, I actually think that's closer to the truth. And here's why. When I go out in the world and I talk to those alums about the experience that they had at Olin, and I look at the amazing things they are doing in the world, it's clear they had a deeply transformational educational experience. Now, why is that? Well, it wasn't that the classes were perfect. I was there, they were not. But rather, I think it's that they were part of a team that was doing something important. They were building a college. They were doing real stuff that real people in the world cared about, and they were reflecting at each point along the way about what was working and what wasn't. In short, they were creating value. These two stories get at what I think is a fundamental misconception that we have when we think about education. And when I say we, I mean we as professors, we as students, we as society. And here's what that misconception boils down to. I think we think about education almost exclusively as what I'll call a prerequisite product, which is to say it's this thing you need first in order to go out in the world and create value. We build that product with these sort of uniform Lego blocks that we call classes, that we snap together into a thing called a semester, and then we take that product and we sell it to students, telling them, once you got all the Lego blocks, then you can go out and do something real. It's pretty clear if you look around, this is the dominant paradigm in society today, right? What do magazines publish? They publish best buy college ratings. What do students do? They shop for colleges, they shop for majors, they shop for courses. And we at colleges, what do? We market what our graduation rates, what our graduates' placements are, what their starting salaries are. All is evidence of the quality of that prerequisite product. It's what Howard Gardner of Harvard University refers to as a transactional model for education. Now, I love Legos. We all love Legos. But I think education is a little different. The stories suggest that the best education is not always that kind of polished product. The best education is not always a prerequisite for value creation. And in fact, the best education is often one in which learning is coincident with and arises as a consequence of that kind of messy process of creating value in the world, whether it's by running a bar, by building a college, or by creating new aerospace materials. In short, I think the stories suggest that truly transformative education is education in which learning and value creation are deeply intertwined and mutually reinforcing. I've got to acknowledge this is not a new idea. Right? If you wind back the clock, you look at most of history, education has often been an apprenticeship. And how does apprenticeship work? Well, the apprentice works with the master craftsman to create value for some third party. It's what we do in graduate school today, right? And also, I think at lots of our programs, if we look at those programs, we have things like co-ops, right? We have things like clubs, Engineers Without Borders, or competition teams. We have senior capstone projects that involve working with industry. But if we're honest about it, I think those examples are the exceptions that prove the rule. They're optional, or they're shoehorned into a structure of classes and prerequisites that's built on that fundamental assumption that education is a prerequisite product. So I ask you, what might it look like if we actually centered our education on the idea that learning and value creation can be mutually reinforcing? Well, one really inspiring example of this is actually right here in urban Dallas. It's called Paul Quinn College. It's an historically black institution. And Paul Quinn students come from really poor backgrounds and typically have struggled with paying for college and also with getting a job afterwards. So in 2015, Paul Quinn, using a sort of entrepreneurial mindset, saw those two challenges as an opportunity. And they decided to become the nation's first urban work college, which means every student at Paul Quinn, as a part of their educational program, holds a job, either on campus or with a local company. Now, to accommodate this, Paul Quinn had to change a lot. They had to change their graduation requirements. They had to change what their catalog said. They had to change their schedule. And they were able to use revenue from student work to drive down tuition costs, to change their financial model. Now, it's early. It's hard to say whether this is a success or not, but the early results are promising. One student at Paul Quinn puts it this way. At Paul Quinn, learning means you get it, and you get paid for it. So I ask you, what might it look like in our programs if we actually, instead of primarily building the education for students out of the building blocks that we call classes, we built it with students using the richer materials of real-world value creation? Maybe such a program might involve faculty and students working together as a sort of interdisciplinary consulting firm, doing real work for real clients full-time. In that kind of approach, the faculty member is not the sage on the stage or the guide on the side, but rather is the senior coworker, the mentor, and the learning facilitator. If you think about it, that approach would certainly generate real value for external folks. It would also provide some pretty amazing developmental opportunities for us as faculty, and also would be a deeply transformative educational experience for our students. I think classes would truly exist in such a model as well, but what if you imagine those classes were not only taken by students, but also in some cases maybe taught by students? After all, learning, helping someone else learn, is a wonderful way to create value, but it's also a wonderful way to learn yourself. And finally, imagine, if you will, what this might mean for the deeply broken financial models that permeate higher education today. Now, I know what most professors would be thinking in response to this. They would be thinking, these are 18-year-olds. They're not going to teach classes. They can't create value for people in the world. They don't know enough yet. And in some sense, that's true. But you know, when my daughter started to play viola, she started to play viola. She didn't take 4 years of music theory classes first. And when that apprentice arrived at the blacksmith shop for the first time, they knew nothing about forging, but somehow the master craftsman found a way for them to create value. And I'll tell you that as an instructor, the very first class that I taught was a subject that I did not know, and I taught it with exactly zero training in teaching. While I feel sorry for those students, it's true that it's possible. So can 18-year-olds do the same thing that a new college grad can? Of course they can, but that doesn't mean that they should be spending 4 years waiting before they create value in the world. Now, I want to be clear, I am not suggesting that we should turn our universities into job training centers. And I am not saying that I believe the purpose of education is to serve value creation. And in fact, I'm kind of saying the opposite, that there's an opportunity in actually having value creation serve the purpose of education. That truly transformative whole person education best happens when learning and value creation are interlocked. If we take this idea seriously, we have to acknowledge it will be hard. It will take a massive rethinking of undergraduate education. I think it's worth considering, though. First, it is worth considering because we must. Our financial models are broken. But beyond that, I think all of us as faculty members aspire to have our students' eyes light up, not just when they remember working in the bar, but also when they remember working with us. And all of our students deserve to have the best education ever. Maybe it's time for us to set aside the Lego blocks and to question the idea that education is purely a prerequisite product, and to imagine instead what education might look like if learning and value creation were deeply intertwined and mutually reinforcing. Thank you.